Welcome to Mining the Media, providing nuggets of news and cutting-edge questions and answers, minus the political blather. Here are your hosts, G.K. Allen and Dave Jeffers.
Welcome to Mining the Media. This is episode 2. I'm Dave Jeffers, co-host and producer of the podcast with my partner, G.K. Allen, who's our creator and co-host. We want to welcome in a very prolific author and historian, William J. Federer. He has an incredible website, AmericanMinute.com. We encourage you to go there, receive his daily email known as American Minute. And without further ado, we want to welcome in William Federer. Well, welcome to Mining the Media. It's we like to find nuggets of news. We ask questions and get answers that are outside of the political blather. I like to call this Think Radio. And our next guest that we're going to have on will, I consider him a friend for years, but I have been receiving his American Minute email. I just went and checked. My very first one was March 3rd, 2011. I get them every day. They're actually really beautiful emails. You need to sign up at AmericanMinute.com, and you can see that William Federer is a prolific writer. He is the single source I use for everything about our founding. In fact, this book right here, America's Gods and Country Encyclopedia of Quotations, I bought the original hardback, which if you look, you try to get the hardback, it's sold out. So you'll have to buy the paperback. My hardback, I think a third of the pages are loose because I have used it for so many times. So please welcome in to Mining the Media, William Bill Federer. Brother, we are so glad to have you on this show. I just can't tell you how much I admire your work for us and your faith to the Lord and your devotion to the country and the history.
Well, Dave and GK, great to be with you.
Did you like Dave's blatant capitalist plug for your books?
That's great. That's great.
I learned that from the great G.K. Allen when he was on The Right Balance, because he always used to tell guys, go ahead and make a blatant capitalist plug.
And the funny thing is, Bill, when I did that, if the writer was a left of center writer, they sometimes almost apologized for the fact that I was promoting them. Didn't feel a little uncomfortable, but what the heck? We still had good conversation. If you don't mind, Dave, I just would like to start speaking with Bill on one particular subject, because I love the title. It's sort of understated, almost in a British way. The interesting history of the income tax. Interesting is kind of funny when we talk about the income tax, but it's a fascinating book. And the question I have for you when I was going over the book was, correct me if I'm wrong, but this, for whatever reason, it hit me. When we fill out our tax form, Bill, are we actually practicing an act of self-incrimination?
It is interesting how it borders on that. When I wrote the book, of course, I have a degree in accounting. I wanted to make it simple enough so that those not familiar with tax and accounting could understand it. But there was no income tax in America prior to the Civil War. And people find that amazing. And they say, well, how did the federal government support itself? Through excise taxes on specific items like salt, tea, tobacco, etc., and import taxes. In other words, things coming in from other countries. They invented the Coast Guard. Originally, it was called revenue cutters, because they would catch those wanting to smuggle things into America without paying the revenue to the federal government. That's how the Coast Guard started. Now they, improved because they would catch boats full of slaves. After 1807, the importation of slaves into America was forbidden. And but you had the federal government basically was the foreigners that paid the taxes. And this was a blessing in a way, because when foreign goods were made more expensive, people would buy stuff made in America. Mm-hmm. And so they would cause the factories in the northern states to be able to, have the costs of starting up new businesses and new factories. And because the tariffs made the English industrial textiles so expensive, people would buy from America. And that's how we got our industrial engine started, so to speak.
Dave, it's all yours.
That's fascinating. You know, Bill, I was looking up here on my shelf up here. I have a DVD that I have used many times to teach from, called One Nation Under God, that the late, great Dr. D. James Kennedy did. And you had a great cameo in there where you started talking about diversity and how Christians were the ones who to introduce the concept of diversity, because it's a biblical concept, and invited everybody into the boat. And then all those who came into the boat got kicked all the Christians out. And that's where we've been for a long, long time.
Well, you have a great memory, Dave. And yeah, so when you looked at the world before, there's a book I wrote called The Treacherous World of the 16th Century, How the Pilgrims Escaped It.
Right.
So really up until that time, if you were in an Islamic country, you had to be Islamic, or you were a second-class citizen, you were persecuted, you didn't have rights and so forth. But in Europe, it was Catholic, and then the Reformation started, and there was an initial treaty in 1555 called the Peace of Augsburg, and in this treaty was a little Latin phrase that had enormous repercussions. The phrase was "Cuios regio ius religio," which means whose is the reign, his is the religion. So in other words, everyone had to believe what their king did. And if you didn't believe the way your king did, you were persecuted, you fled. And so England was Anglican, Scotland was Presbyterian, Holland was Dutch Reformed. Northern Germany and Sweden were Lutheran, Switzerland, Calvinist, Dutch were, the Dutch Reformed in Holland. And then Italy, Spain, France, Austria, Poland remained Catholic. And if you didn't believe the way your king did, you were persecuted. There was this mass migration of people shifting around Europe, and those were the ones that spilled over into America.
Right.
And the first ones that we highlight were the Pilgrims, who were separatists. And then you had the Puritans, and then you had a lot of the other different denominations. And then there was the movement to let in anyone who was a Protestant. And then especially after the Irish potato famine, they let in Catholics. And then there was a persecution of Jews in Bavaria in the middle 1800s, and they were allowed in. And then after the Civil War, many states rewrote their constitutions to say all you had to do was believe in God to hold office. And then in the early, last century, they began to tolerate people that didn't have a religion, finally that atheists, and finally the Islamic.
Yeah.
And the irony is the last ones in the boat decided to push the first ones out.
It's amazing.
So everybody's tolerated in America. I also use the analogy of, imagine you being on your front lawn and you see a street person and you feel compassion and you bring them into your house, feed them. They don't have a place to stay. You let them sleep on the couch. You wake up in the morning, there's two street people. He let in his friend. It's like, okay, I'm late for work. Then you come back and there's a half dozen and they're helping themselves in the icebox. And you're like, okay. And then the next day you come home from work and your house is packed.
Yeah.
And you're like squeezing through the crowd. And then they all look at you and they go, who's this guy? We don't recognize this guy. And they shove you out on the front lawn. And you're looking back at your house, asking yourself, what just happened?
Right.
That's what happened in America. First, you had the Pilgrims that come over. And they then had the Puritans, and they were tolerating the other, separatists and dissenters and nonconformists. And then they tolerated anybody that was Protestant. And then they brought in Catholics and Jews. And finally, the atheists and the transgendered and everybody else and the Islamic are in. And they're wanting to push out anybody that has Christian values.
Yeah, that's the term that you used in the video. It's tolerance, not diversity. It was tolerance. And and so we're no longer tolerated. I'm interested in what you think about because I know what you know about what the First Amendment, freedom of the press meant and what it's become today.
Yeah, it's actually switched to the opposite with all this canceling and wokeness and the deplatforming. It's this concept that actually in the early colonial era, you had people that were speaking out against the king, and the king didn't like that. And so they had the writs of assistance. And that's where they could read all of your mail, sort of like today, they would read your email and they would keep track of everything. But they would collect all your correspondence, and they could arrest you, and they could confiscate all your property without a trial, just on suspicion. And this was one of the reasons that you had the Fourth Amendment, and that we wanted to rebel against the king. So the founders would write articles and publish them and use fictitious names, right? So you had the Ben Franklin's older brother, James, started the Hellfire Club in Boston, and they would write articles, and he got arrested, and his younger brother, Ben, he was like 14, and he was running the print shop while his older brother was in jail. But then Ben Franklin would print stuff, and he would have it be from, Silence Dogood or make up a name, Richard, Bonham Richard. And you had the Thomas Paine wrote articles and signed them Common Sense. John Adams wrote articles and signed them Novangelist, which means New Englander. Mm-hmm. And John Dickinson wrote articles against the king, and he signed them a Pennsylvania farmer. And so why did they do that? That's because if their identity was known, the king would come after them and hang them. And so they understood the value of being able to print stuff with your name and not having to be in fear that you would have some totalitarian dictator come and take you away. Unfortunately, we've had those totalitarian dictators sort of subcontract their censorship to all these big tech companies. And so they're doing censorship.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, Bill, I've got a question for you that is relating actually to what you're talking about with timelines. And my grandkids may be listening to this at some point. Okay. What actually was the Magna Carta in terms of its connective thread, the things that followed, and also the Doomsday Book? Because I think they are important, but a lot of people don't understand what they were.
Right. So the Doomsday Book was just a book that would have judgments for crimes, and doom one man the same way that you would doom another man. But it just meant to judge them. But there was laws. Now, why was that important? So from the beginning of time, one of the books I wrote is called Change to Chains. And I went back to the beginning of the invention of writing, Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets in the Mesopotamian Valley around 3300 BC. That was the beginning of writing. So around 3300 BC, and we're around 2080. So that's around 5,300 years. When you look at the written records, and they show that the most common form of government is a king. Nimrods, pharaohs, Caesars, Kaisers, sultans, czars, Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar. Power wants to concentrate into the hands of one person, sort of like the Lord of the Rings, that movie that the kids are familiar with. And as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger because with military advancements, the king can kill more people. So instead of Cain killing Abel with a rock, they're killing with a bronze weapon that the Greeks had, or an iron weapon that the Hittites had, or a phalanx spear, the big long ones that Alexander the Great's army had, or a scimitar sword that the Muslims had, or gunpowder that the Chinese invented. The weapon improves, but it's that same fallen, selfish human nature that goes back to the fall in the garden type of thing. And so the Magna Carta. So there was this effort to limit a king. First, they would limit the king through his own words. We see a little of that in the Bible, where the one, Persian king gets upset at his wife Vashti because she wouldn't come out for their party, and he says, "I'm not going to see her anymore." And then later he feels bad about it, and his advisors say, "King, you gave your word that you can't see her anymore." And he's like, "Oh," and they tell you what, we'll get all the virgins and we'll come in and you can try them out. And of course, one of them was Esther, and she became the queen. But here, the king was limited by his, and then another was Darius. Yeah. And Daniel is praying to God, and And the advisor said, King, you made a decree that everyone had to pray to you for 30 days, and you can't break your word. And so this king's like, okay, Daniel, you're going in the lion's den, and I'll pray that God will have mercy on you. And but the king was limited by his own words. And then they would limit a king by past kings' words. So they're rebuilding the temple. The neighbors want him to stop, and they say, send to the king to do a search in the records. And sure enough, the king digs and finds in some palace library the decree of Cyrus telling the Jews they could go back and rebuild it. So the current king honored the past king, his words. And then it turned into limiting the king by traditions of past kings' words. And then it would limit him by religion. And so even in pagan countries, the Egyptian pharaohs claimed to be the son of the god Osiris, but they would need this religious order that confirmed that they were the divinely chosen king. And of course, in Europe, it was called the divine right of kings, but the kings would always be crowned by a church person, by the pope or so forth. But this allowed the religious group to have some limiting power on the king, because every now and then they would question, maybe God, or in the pagan scenario, their pagan gods disapproves of this guy. Well, it would destabilize his throne. One of the famous the Chinese emperors ruled by claiming they had a mandate from heaven. One of the Chinese emperor's palace was struck with lightning and it burnt down. And so everybody's like, heaven doesn't like this guy. And he got abandoned by all of his followers. So he limited a king by his words, his other king's words, and then by these traditions, by religious groups. And then finally, the king needed someone to collect taxes. And so he would appoint tax collectors. He would call them barons or lords or dukes, and they would be allowed to have a little police security force, knights, some army, some horseback and armor to go out and collect the king's taxes. And what happened with the Magna Carta was, here's King John in England, and he was ruling as a dictator on his whims. And one day, it was June 15th of 1215 AD, he comes out of his castle, comes over the hill, and lo and behold, he's surrounded by 25 of his barons with their armies. And they want him to sign a document that says you can't arbitrarily pick one of us and throw us in jail and take away our property. If you do, the other 24 of us will gang up on you. Right. And King John was like, pulling his hair out, saying, what do I do? I can't go back to my castle because I'm surrounded by these guys. And he's like, okay, I'll sign it. And but it was the beginning of limiting through a paper document the power of a king. And then the barons turned into the House of Lords, and then the common people had the House of Commons, and they turned into Parliament. You get the word parlay, where you're discussing things and sort of going back and forth. And so the parliament is where they all met to do that. But it was a limiting on the king. And then America comes along, and we flat out cut the umbilical cord. It's like, why try to limit a king through his own words, through past kings' words, through traditions, through religious groups, through barons and concepts? Let's just not have a king. Matter of fact, let's flip it and make the people the king. And so we have a republic. Republic is where the people are king, ruling through representatives. A democracy is where the people are king, ruling directly.
Yeah.
So Athens had 6,000 citizens, and every citizen had to be at the market every day to talk politics about every issue. And if you didn't keep up with politics every single day, you were called an idiotus, an idiot. You didn't know. It was very time consuming. You had no time to do anything else because you had to keep up on all what's being talked about today. A republic is where you take care of your family and your farm, and you have someone in your place that goes to the market every day and talks politics. They are your representative. So you're the king. You're just ruling through representatives. So the word citizen is Greek. It means co-king, like a co-ruler, a co-sovereign. So we're all citizens of the Republic of America. We're all co-kings. I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic. We're basically pledging allegiance to us being in charge of ourselves.
I love that.
I tell you something, I love history. It's always been my favorite subject. Dave well knows. And I thank you because if you notice, none of us, we were not interrupting you. That was a wonderful way of describing it. I am truly grateful.
Hey, well, Bill is an incredible teacher. You know what, Bill? I always have this fantasy after you got talking that lesson. I would love, if it was possible, to bring King George III back to life for 30 days, and we would just cruise America, let him watch the news, let him see what's going on with Facebook, Twitter, and everything. And he'd look at us and go, and y'all revolted against me? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a quote from a congressman in the early 1800s. And they were talking about the First Amendment, talking about religion. And some of them were trying to say, well, maybe the founders didn't want, Christianity. And he said, I think it was, he was a congressman from New Hampshire, but he says, if the founders thought that they were fighting a war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle.
Oh yeah.
So in other words, they were breaking away from the king. But if you could have gone back and say, hey, you know that someday this government that you're setting up is going to want to outlaw the Bible. It's going to want to outlaw that there is a male and a female. Going to outlaw the now, the names mom and dad and schools in California and you cut up babies and sell their body parts. And, if you would have gone back and told them that, yeah, I think they probably would have said, well, we'll stick with the king.
Yeah.
But Dave, you remember me when we were having one of our conversations, and I said to you that Caligula had a horse in the Senate, and now in our own Senate, we have a lot of horses' ass.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, man, I could go on forever with you, Bill, but I know you're a busy man, and I still want to make sure that, in fact, what you were talking about with the 16th century, with the persecution of the different nations for following a king and his religion, that actually was what you wrote about today on your American Minute. And I really encourage everybody, if you love history, history can be really boring. It really can be, but it's all in its presentation. And Bill does a wonderful job, as you've just heard, of presenting history. And you should sign up for AmericanMinute.com. Go to AmericanMinute.com, and he sends you these beautiful emails every morning. In fact, let me see if I can find the picture of the one you sent out today, because they're just they're really nice emails. Let me see if I can share my screen and let everybody have a look at it real quick, because I want to really encourage people to go get.
You're not going to crash the internet right now, are you?
I hope not. We'll see if this works. There it is. This is the email that Bill sent out this morning. It's called American Minute with Bill Federer. This one was called The Dutch Golden Age, World Maritime Economic Power. And then there's his book, The Treacherous World of the 16th Century. You really need to get this email because, like I said, I don't even know how many I got, but I was interested to see how many I have. And I've been getting them since March 3rd, 2011. And they've become much more beautiful over the years, Bill. I'm going to have to say, you really have upped your game. And also,
Dave, can I just interject something?
Please do.
Before we say goodbye to you, Bill, you were talking about how people had to move from one nation to another and how religion changed. And it hit me listening to you. It hit me like a ton of bricks. On my mom's side of the family were French Huguenots, and they had to get out of France, move to England, and eventually became Americans. On my father's side of the family, which was Jewish, they got out of Europe with all the pogroms around 1890. So what you were talking about had a direct effect on me, and now my grandkids will know it as well. That thread is there. Our ancestors matter.
Yeah. That's so good, GK. And, the statistics show that at the time of the founding of the country, 98% of the country was Protestant. About 1% or so was Catholic. and about 0.1% was Jewish. So there was 3 million people and 30,000 Catholics and about 3,000 Jews. There were 7 synagogues in the whole country. Then there was the Irish potato famine in the early 1800s, and the Catholic percent went from 1% to 20%. And there was a big backlash against that, and then it settled down. And then there was a persecution of Jews in Bavaria in the middle 1800s, and they came across and went from 0.1% to about 1%. And then in the 1880s and 90s, with those pogroms that you were talking about in Eastern Europe and Romania and Bulgaria and the Turks and with Russia, the Jewish population went up to 2%. And so even in the 1940s, during World War II, the military said all of the soldiers had to either be Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish. They would have chapels on the bases. There would be like one for the Catholics, one for the Protestants, one for the Jews, right? And so it's a very recent phenomenon of wanting to have the Satanists and the nature worshipers and every other type of Islamic or different religions in the military. And one of the quotes that is from Eisenhower, and he said, "Belief in the supreme being is the basic tenet of Americanism." Right. It's like, okay, we're different, but we all believe in a supreme being, and being the fact that it was Protestant, Jews, and Christians, we're talking about the supreme being of the Bible. Yeah. And what is a couple aspects about this supreme being? Number one, he made us in his image. This is not so in Islam. In Islam, Allah has no image. Mm-hmm. In Hinduism, there's 300 million different gods. It's almost like every family has their own god, and pick which one you're in the image of. And then in atheism, there is no God. And so our founders, when they said we're made in the image of God, they were talking about the God of the Bible. And in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it says that God is not a respecter of persons. And then in the New Testament, Peter's there at a house of a Gentile, and the Holy Spirit comes down and they all get filled. And he says, "Of a truth, I have seen that God is not a respecter of persons." This is different than the woke religion. You say the woke religion? Yeah. The woke religion is a religion of works of which you can never do enough. And it is not, it respects persons. In other words, if you're of a certain race, a certain sexual preference, you get more rights. And if you're another race, or you believe in traditional sexual morals, you get less. And so the woke religion is a religion of respecting persons. It's not blind justice. It's the pushing of an agenda that, if I get started on it, it'll be there. We'll talk for another half hour.
That is a unique perspective, Bill. Wow.
I have enjoyed this thoroughly, Dave.
I didn't mean to cut you off there, but that is an incredible perspective, because you could say it's a cult, but I think it is more of a religion, because they are worshiping their wokeness. I mean, that's the only way to describe the tenacity that they come at you with. It's just unbelievable.
Well, I think some of it, Dave, also comes from the fact they're undereducated or miseducated. An awful lot of people under the age of 25 don't know anything accurately about our founding fathers.
Oh, yeah. And that's by design. Well, Bill, thank you so much. We're going to have you back on, because this has been fascinating. And again, everybody go to AmericanMinute.com, sign up for Bill's free email. You'll love it. And if you're looking for some great resources, particularly for homeschoolers, Bill's got tons of stuff that you can do for homeschooling. Also, if you want, say you're a high school senior homeschooler, do a really good research paper, send them over to AmericanMinute.com.
Or if you need a good quote.
You need a good quote. Hey, I've got my book over here, and it is very well used. And you can see all the pages that are loose from it, because sorry about it, it's messing up, but I have used this book for years. and I love it. It is phenomenal. But you've done great work. You are a true patriot, a true brother in Christ, and I'm just honored that you were able to chalk out some time for us.
Oh, well, Dave and GK, it's great to be with you. And you guys do a tremendous job, and it's a real honor, and look forward to the next time.
Okay. Thanks so much, Bill.
Thank you very much, Bill.
You.
All right. Thank you.
All right. That was so good.
Dave, there was, and the way he described it when I was talking about the Doomsday Book and the way he connected it to the Magna Carta and all the connected.
I never heard all that.
That was, I mean, I literally was hoping to be educated. I knew something about it, obviously, but I was hoping to be more well informed.
I didn't know anything.
That's exactly what happened.
I didn't know anything about the Doomsday Book. I felt really stupid when you were talking about it.
Keep in mind, I've lived a lot of my life in the UK, and almost any show that has UK scenery in it, I'll watch, only because that's my second favorite place on earth.
Ah, okay. Man, that I tell you what, I hope our listeners appreciate what we just heard, because you're not going to hear that kind of teaching in schools. And not because as much that it's been banned, that nobody knows that stuff anymore. They don't, most of your school teachers don't know that stuff. Most of your university history professors don't know that stuff. I remember years ago when you interviewed David McCullough. No, not David McCullough. Yeah, David McCullough.
It was David McCullough and Thomas Fleming were the historians.
When you interviewed David McCullough, and I actually emailed him after he was on the Right Balance.
Brilliant man.
Yeah, and I told him, I said, he was a national treasure. I told him, you're a national treasure. You really are, because what you've done for history. And I remember him saying, because you had asked him about history, why, people didn't like it. It was because he told you it was because of the way it was presented. They made it boring. And I think Bill is a national treasure too. I mean, I was fascinated by how he weaved everything together. I mean, he's a storyteller.
Well, I threw him a curveball.
You did.
And he hit it out of the park.
Yeah, you did. But you know why? Because that's just Bill Federer. Like when he warned us, he said, I could go on forever. Our one of our familiar friends, Rod Martin, his youngest daughter, was sitting with Bill on a plane, and she told the story of how Mr. Bill started talking about something, and it was like off to the races he went. And he's such a fascinating man, and he's such a humble, gentle, quiet spirit. He's not a know-it-all. He loves the Lord. He loves our country. He loves history. Our history.
And you know what's important, Dave? What came through this, from what you say, from what I say, Bill, so on and so forth. It's important for the cancel culture young people to try to open up their minds a little bit. Yeah. And this is what I came away with in just speaking with Bill Federer. And I felt this for years as a history nut, frankly. At the time that the United States of America was invented, because that's what really happened. Right. We invented a culture, a society, and a nation. When you look at the world in 1776, peasants around the world were born peasants and remained peasants. Whether it was a king, an emperor, a chieftain, a queen, whatever, most people had some form of a jackboot on their throat. Women in China were having their feet wrapped so their feet wouldn't grow. 1776, very brave people who really did risk it all, created something that's so easy in today's mindset to criticize. Well, they didn't do it perfectly. They didn't do it perfectly. My attitude is to the pajama boys out there who love to listen to the internet and try to make everybody look bad. Get out of your pajamas. Get out of mama's basement. Open your heart and your mind, and you might be a happier person. Because by and large, the cancel culture and the mentality, they're not happy people. They look for a flaw in others. Someone could have been a decent person for 20 years, made one stupid remark, and all of a sudden they're canceled. Who hasn't made one stupid remark?
Right. Well, that's a great way to end this this episode, Greg, because that's our heart. Our heart is to get people to just stop with the nonsense. Think.
Don't throw America away. Don't throw
right.
America away.
Yeah, we're not shout radio. We're not talk radio. We're not listen radio. We want you to think. And I think I know Bill made me think. This is the stuff that we want to do. These are the kinds of episodes we're hoping that you'll understand that there's a better way, that what's going on right now is nonsense, and it doesn't have to be. You just learned why America should be celebrated. And yes, with all our flaws, as we've said in the past show, our national sin of slavery, yes, all those are acknowledged. However, we need to understand that we are in a unique time in our lives in the history or the life of our country. And I like the analogy: get out of the pajamas, get out of your mom's basement, and get outside, open your heart, open your minds, and start talking to people, because we don't talk to people anymore, and we need to learn how to do that again.
And we need to stop this horrible trait of basically accusation being verdict.
Exactly. Well, my friend, that's another great show. And for those who are listening, again, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to us at your favorite podcast host, iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. We're going to get on all of those if we're not there already. And please do subscribe to us, share, let everybody know about this. We're looking forward to greater things, more guests. We're lining up other guests as we work. If you have somebody you'd like us to interview, you think would be an interesting guest, please go to our webpage, mindingthemedia.com. You can scroll down. There's a contact box there. You can email us and say, hey, you ever thought about interviewing this person? Or have you ever thought about covering this topic? We'd love to hear, because we're gonna get the facts. We're not going to put, and if it's our opinion, then we'll let you know it's our opinion, but we'll mind the media, and we'll go find the nuggets of news, and we'll share that with you. So please do that. Like I said before, give us a good rating if you like it. If you don't, then, maybe don't say anything. But what we do want you to do is please let everybody know about this new podcast, Minding the Media. I'm Dave Jeffers. That's GK Allen. We'll see you next time around.